The first time I caught Cheryl Lambert snooping around my backyard, I thought maybe she'd just gotten lost. After all, the woman was practically the queen bee of our HOA, and she strutted around like she owned every blade of grass in the subdivision. But when I saw her crouched next to my AC unit, fiddling with the wires like some bargain bin spy, I knew this was way deeper than some innocent mistake. I'm Isaac Kent, and I moved into Oak Ridge Estates about 3 years ago. I bought the house fair and square, paid my dues, kept my lawn trimmed, and mostly stayed out of the HOA drama. But Cheryl, she had a radar for anyone who didn't bow down to her endless list of nitpicky rules. It was a brutal Saturday afternoon, the kind where the humidity slaps you in the face as soon as you step outside. I had just settled into the couch, a cold drink in hand, when I noticed movement through the side window. There she was, Cheryl, in her ridiculous neon pink visor, hunched over my AC unit with a screwdriver in her hand. I threw the door open and stomped out onto the porch. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing?" Cheryl jerked upright, clutching the screwdriver like a caught raccoon. "I'm performing a compliance inspection," she barked, her voice as shrill as a fire alarm. "Your AC unit is improperly installed and it's violating HOA standards." "My ac's been there since before I moved in," I said, walking toward her. "You can't just waltz onto my property and start messing with it." She straightened up, trying to look official. "Per Section 4, page 12 of the HOA handbook, I have the authority to inspect exterior mechanical equipment." "Yeah, but that doesn't mean you can tamper with it," I shot back. "Get off my property." "Now." Cheryl huffed and stomped away, but not before shooting me a look like I had just kicked her dog. I watched her until she disappeared around the corner, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't know the full extent of it yet, but something told me Cheryl wasn't gonna let this drop. And I sure as hell wasn't either. By Monday morning, the whole thing still stuck in my head like a splinter. I couldn't just let it go. Cheryl hadn't just crossed a line, she had trampled it. So after grabbing a cup of coffee, I sat down at my kitchen table and pulled out the thick binder of HOA documents they had dumped on me when I moved in. I flipped through the pages until my fingers found the section she quoted. Sure enough, it mentioned inspections, but it clearly stated they had to be scheduled in writing with a minimum of 72 hours notice, and homeowners had to be present. Nowhere did it say that board members could just sneak onto private property and start unscrewing panels like amateur repairmen. Grabbing my phone, I called the non-emergency police line. The dispatcher on the other end listened carefully as I explained what had happened. When I mentioned that she had been tampering with a critical home system without authorization, the dispatcher's tone sharpened. "That's not just trespassing," she said. "It's tampering with private property, and depending on the circumstances, it could qualify as criminal mischief or even attempted sabotage. We'll send an officer out to take your statement." About 30 minutes later, a patrol car rolled up. Officer Ramirez stepped out, a tall woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense stride. I led her around the side of the house, pointing out the AC unit and showing her where Cheryl had been messing with it. "You said she had a screwdriver?" Officer Ramirez asked, pulling out a small notepad. "Yeah." I caught her right here, leaning over it. She was twisting something near the control box. "Did you happen to get any photos or video?" I cursed under my breath. "No, but I installed a security camera under the eaves last year after someone kept stealing my Amazon packages." It might have caught her. We went inside and I pulled up the footage. Sure enough, there Cheryl was, clear as day, in that neon visor, poking around like she owned the place. Officer Ramirez's eyebrows lifted slightly as she watched. "This is solid evidence," she said. "I'll need to make a copy of this, and I'd recommend you file a formal complaint with the department. Based on this, we can pursue charges." As she left, promising to follow up, I leaned against the doorframe, feeling a surge of satisfaction. For once, Cheryl wouldn't be able to wriggle out of the consequences. The next day, I received a notice taped to my front door. It was printed on bright yellow paper and stamped with the HOA's logo. Violation notice: unauthorized installation of security camera facing common areas. I laughed out loud. They were grasping at straws now. My camera was installed on my house, pointing solely at my own driveway and side yard. There was no common area anywhere near it. They were desperate, and it showed. At lunch, I made a trip down to the HOA office, a stuffy building tucked inside a strip mall next to a nail salon. Cheryl was behind the counter, pretending to shuffle papers. She looked up, and her face tightened when she saw me. "You can't have unauthorized surveillance equipment visible from the sidewalk," she said before I could open my mouth. "You might want to call your lawyer," I said, setting a manila envelope on the counter. "Here's a copy of the police report and the footage. Tampering with private property is a felony in this state, Cheryl." Her hand froze halfway to the envelope. She stared at me for a long moment, the color draining from her face. "You're making a mistake," she hissed. "No," I said, smiling coldly. "You did." Without another word, I turned and walked out, feeling her glare burning holes in the back of my head. By Friday, word had spread through the neighborhood. I heard whispers from my neighbors when I stepped outside. Cars slowed down in front of my driveway. Even old Mr. Henderson from 2 houses down, who usually kept to himself, gave me a nod of approval when I checked my mail. That evening, Officer Ramirez called with an update. "We're moving forward with charges," she said. "Criminal mischief, trespassing, and attempted tampering with critical infrastructure. Your AC unit qualifies because it's essential for health and safety, especially with the heat advisories." I thanked her and hung up, feeling a weight lift off my chest. The next morning, a squad car pulled up across the street. Cheryl was out front watering her over manicured roses. When the officers approached her, clipboard in hand, she tried to argue, her hands flailing. But after a few minutes, they cuffed her right there on her front lawn, in full view of half the neighborhood. I watched from my porch, sipping coffee while Mrs. Patel from next door filmed the whole thing with her phone. Cheryl shouted something about wrongful arrest and misunderstanding, but it didn't matter. They loaded her into the back seat and drove off, leaving her roses spraying water onto the sidewalk. Later that afternoon, I attended the emergency HOA meeting that had been hastily called. The board members, minus Cheryl of course, sat stiffly at the folding tables set up in the clubhouse. Greg, the HOA treasurer, stood up and cleared his throat. He was usually as spineless as a wet noodle, but today he looked like he had aged 10 years. "We are taking this matter very seriously," he said, avoiding eye contact with anyone. "Effective immediately, Cheryl Lambert has been suspended from the HOA board pending the outcome of her criminal proceedings." The room buzzed with murmurs. A few people clapped. Someone near the back cheered. Greg continued, "Additionally, the board will be reviewing our policies regarding inspections and member conduct to ensure this never happens again." After the meeting, a group of neighbors gathered outside under the dim streetlights. People I barely knew before were shaking my hand, clapping my back, thanking me for standing up to her. "You did what we were all too afraid to do," Mrs. Patel said, her voice warm with gratitude. I just nodded, feeling a strange mix of pride and relief. It wasn't just about me. Cheryl had bullied the whole neighborhood for years, hiding behind the HOA's name to do whatever she pleased. Now, finally, she would have to answer for it. And Oak Ridge Estates. It felt like it could finally start to breathe again. The weekend after Cheryl's arrest, Oak Ridge Estates buzzed with a kind of cautious excitement. Groups of neighbors gathered on driveways and sidewalks, talking in hushed, animated voices. Some people glanced nervously at the empty house across from mine, where Cheryl's prized rose bushes were already starting to wilt without her obsessive care. For the first time since I moved in, the neighborhood felt like it was waking up from a bad dream. But I wasn't naive enough to think everything was over. On Monday morning, I was pulling weeds in the front yard when a black sedan with tinted windows rolled slowly past my house. I wiped my hands on my jeans and watched it disappear around the corner. Something told me that Cheryl's allies on the board weren't going to let this go without a fight. Sure enough, that afternoon, a certified letter showed up in my mailbox. It was a formal notification from the HOA's legal counsel. They were accusing me of defamation and creating a hostile environment for board members. They demanded that I retract my false accusations and threatened civil action if I didn't comply. I laughed dryly as I read it at the kitchen counter. They were desperate. But the letterhead caught my attention, specifically the name of the attorney. A quick search showed that this particular lawyer had been disbarred in another state for ethical violations. Apparently, the HOA had scraped the bottom of the barrel for representation. I wasn't about to let them use scare tactics to bully me. Instead of responding directly, I called Officer Ramirez. She answered on the second ring, her voice brisk but friendly. "They're trying to intimidate you," she said after I explained the letter. "Don't engage with them directly. Forward everything to the prosecutor's office handling Cheryl's case. It could be considered witness intimidation." That word hit me like a jolt. Witness intimidation wasn't just sleazy, it was criminal. Following her advice, I forwarded the letter to the assistant district attorney assigned to Cheryl's case. Within an hour, I got a response. They were very interested in the letter, very interested. The next day, 2 detectives showed up at the HOA office. I watched from a distance as they walked inside, their presence sending a clear message. By sunset, another letter was taped to my front door, this time from the interim HOA president, a jittery man named Don Summers. It was a groveling apology, filled with vague promises to review internal procedures and restore trust within the community. I wasn't impressed. They were only sorry they got caught. Meanwhile, Cheryl's situation went from bad to worse. Word spread that during her unauthorized inspection of my AC unit, she had actually loosened wiring connected to the condenser. According to the HVAC technician hired by the police for inspection, if the unit had shorted out, it could have caused an electrical fire. That changed everything. Tampering was one thing, endangering lives was another. The prosecutor upgraded the charges to include reckless endangerment, a felony that carried serious prison time. Cheryl's attorney tried to argue it was an accident, but the surveillance footage told a different story. She had deliberately unscrewed the panel, tugged at wires, and shoved them back without securing them properly. At the preliminary hearing, I sat quietly in the courtroom as Cheryl shuffled in, wearing a wrinkled blouse and a sour expression. She kept her eyes low, avoiding the cluster of neighbors who had shown up to watch. The judge wasted no time. Cheryl's bail conditions were tightened, and she was ordered to stay away from all HOA properties until the case concluded. Outside the courtroom, a few board members huddled together, whispering furiously. I walked past them without a word, feeling the weight of their stares on my back. Later that week, Officer Ramirez invited me to a community meeting at City Hall. Apparently, Cheryl's antics had drawn attention beyond our neighborhood. A councilwoman who lived 2 subdivisions over had heard about the situation and wanted to propose new legislation to regulate HOA authority more strictly. At the meeting, residents from all corners of the city poured into the room. People told stories about shady violations, fake fines, selective enforcement, story after story of abuse of power. I realized Oak Ridge Estates wasn't unique. We were just the latest victims. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple. Homeowners associations were supposed to protect our property values, I said, my voice steady, not create little kingdoms ruled by people who think they're above the law. The councilwoman nodded approvingly. Within weeks, she introduced the Homeowner Protection Act, which would require third-party audits of HOAs and impose criminal penalties for board members who abused their authority. Meanwhile, back in Oak Ridge Estates, the interim board scrambled to distance themselves from Cheryl. They sent out flyers promising reform and transparency. But nobody trusted them anymore. A group of neighbors, including Mrs. Patel, Mr. Henderson, and even the Millers at the end of the cul-de-sac, banded together to form an independent homeowners committee. I was asked to chair it, but I declined. I didn't want power, I just wanted peace. Instead, I helped them organize a recall election for the entire board. We canvassed door to door, gathering signatures. People were eager to sign. By the end of the month, we had enough support to trigger a full vote. The recall election was like a festival. Barbecue grills fired up on driveways. Kids rode their bikes between clusters of adults casting ballots. It was the first time the neighborhood had truly come together. When the results were announced, every single board member was removed. In their place, we elected a new board made up of actual neighbors, people who wanted to serve the community, not control it. One of the first motions they passed was a full audit of the HOA's finances. What they found made everyone's blood run cold. Cheryl and her inner circle had been skimming money from HOA dues for years. Falsified invoices, kickbacks from contractors, unauthorized bonuses. It was blatant theft. The amount totaled over $70,000. The new board turned everything over to the authorities. More charges were filed against Cheryl and two of her closest allies: embezzlement, fraud, racketeering. It was as if the earth itself shifted under Oak Ridge Estates. The fear that had kept everyone silent for so long evaporated overnight. Neighbors started hosting block parties. Kids chalked colorful drawings on the sidewalks without worrying about violations. People planted gardens, painted their shutters, added swings to their trees, all things that would have earned them nasty letters before. As for me, I finally finished the backyard deck I had been dreaming about since I moved in. One evening, as the sun set behind the rooftops, I sat on that deck with a cold drink in hand, watching the neighborhood come alive in a way it never had before. Mrs. Patel waved from her porch. Mr. Henderson's grandkids ran laughing down the street, their sneakers flashing. Somewhere down the block, someone was playing an old rock song on a portable speaker. For the first time in a long time, Oak Ridge Estates didn't feel like a battleground. It felt like home, and Cheryl. Last I heard, she took a plea deal. She avoided prison but was slapped with heavy fines, hundreds of hours of community service, and a permanent ban from serving on any HOA board ever again. Justice wasn't always quick, it wasn't always clean, but when it came, it was sweet. And it all started with catching one desperate, power-hungry woman trying to pull the plug on my AC. Summer deepened, and Oak Ridge Estates transformed into something it had never been: an actual community. People who once avoided eye contact now waved when passing by. Driveways turned into gathering spots, and kids chalked hopscotch grids without fear of receiving violation notices. But under that fresh sense of freedom, a deeper reckoning loomed. The audit the new board commissioned kept digging up worse surprises. They uncovered that Cheryl and her inner circle hadn't just skimmed dues, they had also funneled HOA funds into a fake landscaping company. The so-called vendor had been billing the HOA thousands of dollars a month for services that never happened. No one had noticed before because Cheryl had buried the payment authorizations under layers of fake minutes and bogus expense reports. The new board, determined to make things right, handed over everything to the district attorney's office. Investigators moved swiftly. What started as a single charge of tampering spiraled into a full-blown criminal enterprise case. One evening, the new board president, a retired corporate auditor named Alina, knocked on my door. "We need to talk about the next steps," she said, holding a folder thick with papers. We sat at my kitchen table, the same spot where I had first realized Cheryl was playing dirty. Alina opened the folder and pointed to a list of names, dollar amounts, and suspicious transactions. "This wasn't just Cheryl," she said, her voice steady but grim. "It looks like she had at least 4 other board members involved. It's organized fraud, racketeering." I leaned back, absorbing it. Cheryl had built herself a little empire, and she had nearly gotten away with it. Alina continued, tapping a printed email chain. They even coordinated fake inspections to justify fines against homeowners they didn't like. Guess who had the highest number of violations issued over the last 2 years? I didn't have to guess. My name was at the top of the list. "We're turning over everything to the state attorney general," Alina said. "This has crossed the line into a statewide criminal investigation." 2 weeks later, an unmarked van rolled into the neighborhood. Investigators in plainclothes moved methodically, seizing boxes of documents from Cheryl's abandoned home and interviewing former board members. Subpoenas followed, and suddenly the ones who had stood shoulder to shoulder with Cheryl were cutting deals to save themselves. One afternoon, I ran into Officer Ramirez at the grocery store. She was off-duty, wearing jeans and a ball cap, but her expression was serious when she spotted me by the produce aisle. "Isaac," she said, lowering her voice. "Just wanted you to know those fraud charges. They're sticking. Big time." "They found offshore accounts linked to Cheryl." I raised an eyebrow. "Offshore," she nodded. "Cayman Islands. Small amounts at first, but it snowballed. Looks like she was planning her exit before you caught her." The weight of it hit me in a way the earlier drama hadn't. Cheryl hadn't just been a petty tyrant with too much free time. She had been systematically draining the neighborhood's future for her own gain. Court proceedings stretched through the fall. Cheryl's defense crumbled as more evidence surfaced. Former allies took plea deals, testifying against her. When the trial finally came, it wasn't some dramatic shouting match. It was cold, clinical paper trails, bank records, forensic accountants laying out every dollar she had stolen. I was called to testify, mostly about the AC tampering incident that had sparked everything. On the stand, I stuck to the facts, answering the prosecutor's questions clearly. Cheryl sat at the defense table, looking smaller than I had ever seen her, her once proud posture sagging under the weight of what she had done. The jury didn't take long. "Guilty on all counts: racketeering, wire fraud, embezzlement, reckless endangerment, criminal mischief, trespassing." The judge sentenced her to 15 years in state prison, with no chance of parole for at least 10. She was also ordered to pay full restitution over $180,000 directly to the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. After the sentencing, a small group of us gathered outside the courthouse. Elena, Mrs. Patel, Mr. Henderson, and a few others. There were no cheers or high fives, just quiet satisfaction. Justice had been served, but the scars Cheryl left behind would take time to heal. Back home, changes kept rolling in. The HOA bylaws were rewritten from the ground up, this time with community input. Financials were posted online monthly. Board meetings were recorded and publicly archived. Most importantly, the new board implemented a strict conflict of interest policy, making sure no one could ever again use the HOA as their personal piggy bank. On a crisp Saturday morning, the neighborhood held its first real block party. Not some forced, mandatory attendance event, but a genuine celebration. Food trucks lined the street, kids raced with balloons tied to their wrists, and a local band played from a makeshift stage set up on the greenbelt. Elena found me near the grill, where Mr. Henderson was flipping burgers with surprising skill. "You know," she said, handing me a lemonade, "if you hadn't stood up when you did, none of this would have come out." I shrugged. "I just wanted to be left alone. Never figured it would turn into all this." Elena smiled, a real one, not the tight, forced kind people used when Cheryl was around. Sometimes standing up for yourself stands up for everyone else too. As the sun dipped low, casting long golden shadows across the lawns, neighbors I'd barely spoken to before stopped by to say hello. Conversations flowed easily, without the heavy cloud of paranoia that once hung over every interaction. Later that night, sitting on my finished deck, I thought about how close Cheryl had come to pulling it all down. How one woman's hunger for control had nearly hollowed out an entire community. And how one simple decision, refusing to be bullied, had broken that cycle. The stars blinked into existence overhead, clear and sharp against the darkening sky. Somewhere nearby, laughter floated through the air. For the first time in a long time, it wasn't at someone's expense. It was just joy. Simple, honest, and free.